Imagine standing in a city where every street is a battlefield, every building is in ruins, and every breath you take carries the chill of a harsh winter and the fear of survival. Now imagine knowing that the fate of an entire warrant, perhaps. The world depends on what happens in that very place. This is the story of Stalingrad. This story begins in the year 1942, when the world was at war. In the heart of Russia, there was a city named Stalingrad. It wasn't just a city of factories and homes, it was a symbol of strength and survival for the people who lived there. But that year, something terrible happened. The German army came with a plan to take the city. They thought it would be easy, they thought it would be quick. But the people of Stalingrad had other ideas. The battle wasn't like stories of knights and castles. It wasn't clean or simple. It was harsh. People fought on every street, inside broken buildings, under falling snow. They fought not just with weapons, but with their hearts and their will to survive. They were cold, they were hungry, and many were afraid. But they kept going. As the winter grew colder, something began to change. The Soviet soldiers launched a great surprise attack called Operation Uranus. They surrounded the German army, cutting them off from help. It was a trap that the German soldiers couldn't escape. The German leaders told them to stay, but the cold kept coming. And the hunger kept growing. In February 1943, after months of fighting and suffering, the battle finally ended. The German army surrendered. It was the first time the world saw that Nazi Germany could be beaten. It was the beginning of something new, a turning point in the war. And even though this story is filled with sadness, it's also filled with lessons. Lessons about courage, about choices, and about the strength people can find inside themselves when everything seems lost. Sometimes, the hardest stories help us understand the world a little better. The Battle of Stalingrad is remembered as one of the most significant turning points in World War II. Before this battle, Nazi Germany had been advancing rapidly across Europe and deep into Soviet territory. Hitler believed that taking Stalingrad would secure control over southern Russia and open a path to the valuable oil fields in the Caucasus region. Capturing the city also carried symbolic importance, as it bore the name of Soviet leader Joseph Stalin. Germany's army, known as the Wehrmacht, launched a fierce attack in the summer of 1942, determined to seize the city quickly. The fighting was brutal, with soldiers clashing in the streets, factories, and ruined buildings of Stalingrad. Every block, every room became a battlefield. The German army pushed deep into the city, but Soviet forces refused to surrender. As the battle dragged on, Soviet commanders began preparing for a large-scale counterattack. They understood that if Stalingrad fell, it could break Soviet morale and potentially allow Germany to dominate the entire Eastern Front. In November 1942, the Soviet Union launched Operation Uranus, a carefully planned offensive that targeted the weaker German flanks, where Romanian and Italian troops were stationed. This move allowed Soviet forces to encircle the German Sixth Army, trapping them inside the city with no way out. Despite being surrounded, Hitler ordered his soldiers to fight to the last man, refusing to allow a retreat. The trapped German soldiers soon ran out of food, ammunition, and supplies, with the harsh winter making conditions even worse. On February 2, 1943, the remaining German forces surrendered. This victory not only saved Stalingrad, but also shattered the myth of German invincibility. From that point forward, the Soviet Union began pushing German forces back, shifting the balance of power in the war. The Battle of Stalingrad is often described as one of the bloodiest battles in human history because of the sheer scale of loss and destruction it caused. The total number of casualties, including soldiers and civilians, reached nearly 2 million. Both the Soviet Union and Nazi Germany suffered enormous losses in terms of human lives. The battle lasted for several months, from August 1942 to February 1943, and during this time, the city of Stalingrad was reduced to rubble. Entire neighborhoods were destroyed by relentless bombing and artillery shelling. The civilians who remained in the city faced constant danger, with many trapped under collapsed buildings or killed in the crossfire. People struggled to find food, water, and shelter. Yet many still worked in factories producing weapons to support the soldiers fighting just outside their doors. The soldiers themselves faced unimaginable horrors. Soviet troops fought fiercely to defend their city, engaging in close-quarters combat where every street, basement, and rooftop became a battlefield. German soldiers were ordered to fight to the death, with no hope of retreat. Both sides endured starvation, extreme cold, and exhaustion. Disease spread rapidly among the soldiers and civilians alike, as medical supplies were scarce and conditions were filthy. For many soldiers, survival came down to minutes and inches as they fought in the ruins of buildings and trenches filled with ice and mud. In some cases, soldiers went into battle without enough ammunition, using only knives or bayonets. Many historians consider the battle not only a military clash but also a human catastrophe. The destruction of Stalingrad and the huge loss of life had a deep psychological impact on both the Soviet and German sides. The memory of the suffering endured by soldiers and civilians continues to serve as a symbol of sacrifice and endurance in the face of overwhelming adversity. Asterisk. The harsh Russian winter played a devastating role in the Battle of Stalingrad, bringing extreme suffering to the German troops who were unprepared for such brutal conditions. As the temperatures began to plummet in late 1942, the soldiers found themselves trapped in a frozen city, surrounded by snow and ice. Many of the German soldiers lacked proper winter clothing and supplies, having been sent to Stalingrad with the belief that victory would come quickly. Instead, they became stranded in the midst of one of the coldest winters recorded during the war. The freezing temperatures reached as low as -30 degrees Celsius, making even the simplest tasks almost impossible. Weapons froze, vehicles broke down, and frostbite became widespread among the German troops. The lack of fuel meant that fires were hard to maintain, leaving soldiers to huddle together in ruined buildings just to keep warm. Starvation soon followed, as supply lines had been cut off by the Soviet forces. The German soldiers were trapped without enough food, and many resorted to eating anything they could find, including horse meat, leather, or even tree bark. The combination of hunger and freezing temperatures weakened the army to the point where they could barely fight back. The Soviet soldiers, although also suffering, were better prepared for the winter conditions and continued to press their advantage. German commanders requested permission to retreat, but Hitler refused, ordering them to stand their ground no matter the cost. The extreme weather not only drained the physical strength of the German troops but also destroyed their morale, leaving them hopeless and defeated. The winter turned Stalingrad into a frozen graveyard, where thousands perished, not from bullets or bombs but from cold, hunger, and exhaustion, as they waited in vain for help that never arrived. The defense of Stalingrad became a symbol of unwavering resistance and courage by the Soviet people. When the German army launched their fierce assault on the city in August 1942, the Soviet defenders, including both soldiers and civilians, refused to surrender. The battle quickly turned into brutal street fighting, where every building, every floor, and every room became a battlefield. Soviet soldiers fought in small units, engaging in close combat with German troops amid the ruins of factories, houses, and streets covered in rubble. Civilians who remained in the city played a crucial role as well. Many worked tirelessly in weapons factories that were still operating despite constant bombardment. Women, elderly citizens, and even children contributed by carrying supplies, making ammunition, and repairing damaged weapons under extremely dangerous conditions. The Soviet leadership ordered their troops to hold the city at all costs. Retreat was forbidden, and commanders enforced strict discipline to ensure that no ground was given up easily. The famous Soviet order, "Not one step back," became the rallying cry for the defenders. Soldiers fought with extraordinary determination, knowing that losing Stalingrad would mean losing their homeland. Many fought without adequate supplies or weapons, relying on their courage and determination to survive each day. Despite constant German attacks, the Soviet defenders launched frequent counterattacks, pushing back enemy advances and reclaiming lost positions. Snipers played an important role in the defense, with marksmen like Vasily Zaitsev becoming famous for taking down large numbers of enemy soldiers. The defenders endured hunger, cold, and exhaustion, but never gave up their city. Their resilience turned Stalingrad into a symbol of Soviet strength and determination, inspiring others across the Soviet Union to keep fighting. The sacrifices made during the defense of Stalingrad became legendary and are remembered as a powerful example of human endurance against overwhelming odds. Operation Uranus was the Soviet Union's carefully planned counteroffensive that changed the course of the Battle of Stalingrad and ultimately World War II. By November 1942, the German Sixth Army had pushed deep into Stalingrad, becoming heavily involved in bitter urban combat. However, their flanks, or sides, were dangerously weak and protected mainly by Romanian, Hungarian, and Italian troops, who were poorly equipped and undertrained for the harsh winter conditions. Soviet commanders recognized this vulnerability and designed a bold plan to encircle the enemy. The operation began on November 19, 1942, with Soviet forces launching powerful attacks on the northern and southern flanks of the German positions outside Stalingrad. Massive waves of tanks, artillery, and infantry crashed through the defenses of the Axis allies, quickly overwhelming them. The Soviet troops advanced rapidly, meeting little resistance from the exhausted and outnumbered enemy units. Within a matter of days, the Soviet pincers closed around the German Sixth Army, trapping over 250,000 Axis soldiers inside Stalingrad in what became known as the Stalingrad Pocket. The German High Command was shocked by the speed and success of the Soviet operation, but Hitler stubbornly ordered his forces to stay in place and fight rather than retreat. Inside the encirclement, German soldiers faced a worsening situation as they ran out of food, fuel, and ammunition. The Luftwaffe, Germany's air force, tried to supply the trapped soldiers by air, but the effort failed miserably due to Soviet anti-aircraft defenses and poor weather conditions. The encircled troops became weaker by the day, unable to break out or receive effective help. Soviet forces tightened their grip, gradually closing in on the surrounded German army from all sides. Operation Uranus proved to be one of the most successful military offensives of the war, completely shifting the momentum in favor of the Soviet Union. One of the most crucial factors that led to the German defeat at Stalingrad was Adolf Hitler's stubborn refusal to allow his forces to retreat, despite the worsening situation. When the German Sixth Army found itself surrounded by Soviet forces after Operation Uranus, the commanders on the ground realized the danger they were in and requested permission to break out of the encirclement. However, Hitler rejected these requests, insisting that the army stand its ground and fight to the last soldier. He believed that holding Stalingrad was essential for both military and symbolic reasons. Hitler imagined that surrendering the city named after Joseph Stalin would damage German prestige and morale, so he continued to demand a defense at all costs. He assured his generals that the Luftwaffe would supply the trapped troops by air until relief forces arrive. However, the air supply effort failed terribly, as Soviet anti-aircraft guns and bad weather prevented most of the planes from reaching the encircled soldiers. The supplies that did arrive were nowhere near enough to sustain the army. German soldiers soon faced severe shortages of food, medical supplies, and ammunition. As the weeks passed, hunger, cold, and disease spread rapidly through the German ranks. The promised relief offensive, called Operation Winter Storm, was launched in December 1942 but failed to break through the Soviet lines. Hitler still refused to allow the trapped soldiers to attempt an escape, effectively sealing their fate. Surrounded on all sides and with no chance of rescue, the German soldiers inside Stalingrad grew weaker each day. By late January 1943, German resistance collapsed in stages, and the remaining troops surrendered on February 2, 1943. Hitler's decision to forbid retreat not only led to a massive military disaster but also shattered the myth of German invincibility, marking a clear turning point in the war. The story of the Battle of Stalingrad is not just a tale of military strategy or numbers. It is a story of human struggle, courage, and the terrible cost of war. It shows how a city became a symbol of defiance, and how determination can turn the tide even in the darkest moments. This battle changed the course of World War II, but it also left behind deep scars, with millions of lives lost and a city left in ruins. The sacrifice of those who fought and suffered at Stalingrad reminds us of the strength people can show when faced with impossible odds. It teaches us about the importance of resilience, unity, and the great responsibility that comes with leadership and decision-making during times of conflict. Though the guns have long been silent, the lessons from Stalingrad continue to echo, reminding us of both the horrors of war and the enduring power of hope and perseverance.